Everybody in Alaska. My name is Wendy Witas, and I'm the wife of Pastor Mark Witas, and I'm also a family and children's pastor, but a good share of my life, 20 plus years, was also as a teacher. So I've kind of sat in both spots where you are sitting right now. We're going to be dealing with mental health today, and I think you can be encouraged that there is a lot of great information that we can pass on to even children as young as 2 years old, some of the things that I'll be teaching you. So let's get right into it, and you're probably going to see my screen more than you see me, but I thought I'd just introduce myself, and then most of the time you'll see the screen of what I'm talking about. So here we go. So what can we learn about ourselves, our churches, and schools through understanding the brain and the mental health? Well, there's a lot. And so we're going to take a journey just to understand what we can do as pastors and teachers that can really impact our communities and those that we are responsible for in a positive way for mental health. Now, research has actually shown that faith communities have an overall positive impact on mental health, where faith communities are supportive, loving, and inclusive, and they often prevent suicide. However, the converse is true. There is some research where faith communities have had an adverse effect on mental health, where there's been abuse issues, authoritarian issues, and this encourages suicide. So obviously, as a faith community, we want to be on the positive side. So where are all our mental issues coming from? From mental health firstaid.org, they were giving a lot of the things that have happened in 2020. And if you just look at this list, you'll see, 40% of U.S. adults report struggling with mental health or substance abuse. 1 in 6 youth ages 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. Half of the lifetime mental illness begins at age 14 and 75% by age 24. Depression alone costs the nation about $210.5 billion annually. The average delay between onset of mental illness and symptoms and treatment is 11 years, which I think is just really, really sad. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people, get it? Age 10 to 34. That's pretty sad. And then you can go on down the list, and it seems rather discouraging, but there is hope. But this just gives you an idea how COVID 2020, obviously with the isolation issues and loneliness, has even compounded a lot of these numbers. So how does trauma affect the brain? Obviously, we're dealing with a lot of mental health issues in our country. So when the brain is flooded with cortisol, it pools in the frontal cortex. This inhibits regulation, the ability to detach. It limits the cause and effect thinking, and therefore decision making. And cortisol levels remain high for too long of a period. It leads to depression and decreased prefrontal cortex functioning, and we'll explain that a little bit more. But this biological and physiological effects of the brain are really strong. This child that's actually we're seeing the imaging of, it wasn't physical abuse. This was actually a child that was just neglected. And if you look where the red is where there's a lot of activity going on. So on the left, you'll see the healthy brain. And on the right is the traumatized brain. And you'll notice that those reds, there's parts that are very dark, and that means there's just no activity happening. So neglect, loneliness, being disengaged, there's so many things that can really affect our brain and our health. So obviously it occurs that we as pastors and teachers need to be more equipped to deal with what's going on in our schools and our churches, and we need to have ways to help people's brains be healthier and have a healthier mental health outlook, and obviously one that's more focused towards the way God meant us to be. So, how are we equipping that Sabbath school teacher who's a volunteer that's dealing with a difficult child and they don't know really what's going on and how to help? Or the school, as a teacher, have you found that every year it's getting harder because kids are more challenging? It's harder for them to sit down, it's harder for them to focus. Are you finding more and more mental disorders in your classroom that take up a majority of your teaching time so that you feel like you hardly get to teach? Or as a faith-based community, we need to know what's going on and ways we can really help our people to become better equipped to have stronger mental health. So what are some of the challenges we are facing with that have been increasing over time? Many of you are probably familiar with the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience, and they're finding that if you have had more than one ACE or trauma in your childhood, then you will have more susceptibility to cancer, to heart disease, and all those different kinds of things. And I'm not going to go into that heavily because you're very familiar with that. Also, hereditary. We are discovering that more and more it is showing up in the third and fourth generation. And we already knew that from what we had in Scripture, where it talks about the sins of the fathers being visited on the children. Not because God's mean, but that's just how it has happened in our bodies. Dr. Siegel, who is an incredible neuro researcher and psychologist, has done a really simple thing to help people understand their brain. So I want you to take out your fist like this, okay? And to understand that this is going to be your brain stem. Right here, this will be your limbic system, where you have the thalamus, hypothalamus, you've got your amygdala. And then these fingers right here will be your frontal lobe, or your cerebral cortex, where your executive functions are. So where you have your planning, your love and logic, and all those wonderful skills that are very important in decision making. So that is basically the model. Now, what happens is when there is a stressor or a trauma, the amygdala is alerted. It's like the first alert system of the body, and it will inform the rest of the body, and there is like a fulcrum. It will shut off the cortex, and they basically call it flipping the lid, because all of a sudden everything is happening in your body to get you out of the stressor, either for fight or flight or staying put, or they have a couple of others that they use now. When that happens, there's a lot of cortisol that's being shot up into the body to get it moving, to get it out of there. So we're going to talk a little bit of what happens when something like that occurs in a child. Or just for example, if I thought there was something slithering across my feet and I thought, oh no, it's a snake, I'm scared, yucks. And my heart begins to pump. I've got cortisol shooting through and flooding my prefrontal cortex because I need to get out of there. I have adrenaline, my breath is more shallow, and I look down and oh, it's just a hose, a water hose. And all of a sudden my flipping the lid is now calmed, and I get a nice hug that, oh, everything's okay. I will be okay. You're okay. We're all fine. But if that doesn't happen, and I remain in this, and I actually get looped into a system of stress, then there can be a lot of damage, because we were never meant to live flipping our lid all the time. So let's just look at three types of stress. So it's not too bad, it's a positive, it's brief increases in heart rate, intensifies focus, mild elevation in levels of stress hormones, but you're okay. If there is a tolerable degree of stress, maybe it's more serious, but temporary stress responses mitigated by positive buffering influence or relationships, and it calms down that stress. The bad part is when it's in a toxic degree of stress, where it's intense and prolonged, and it's activating that stress response system without positive buffering influences or relationships. And so you can see that this can become very dangerous. And if you were going to think of this stress thing, God made this system to work well, but water's a good thing. But a lot of water, flooding, can cause a lot of damage. Just like cortisol in the right amount is a good thing. But when it is overwhelming, it can damage so many things. So I want to imagine with you a child that you might have in your Sabbath school or maybe in school. And let's just imagine a morning for them, okay? Just imagine that morning the parents were arguing and yelling, and maybe they yelled at the child because they didn't clean their room or they didn't do something right, and there's a stressor that has occurred with that child. Then they get to school or Sabbath school, and maybe a child in front of them jumps in line before them, and that's another stressor. And then perhaps a friend of theirs they think is actually laughing at them because they connect with their eyes, and that person is laughing, and then they're interpreting it as, oh, they're laughing at me. And pretty soon that child is really ready to flip their lid, and it can take anything else to just trigger and have it completely flipped. Now, if kids are taught what's going on when they flip their lid, they can actually learn to be better regulators of their own emotions and understand what's happening and learn how to calm down those things. So I want you to think about a couple things that you can do. Number one is just being empathetic. When we notice someone, perhaps your child, has flipped their lid, it can help to understand that what is happening from that person's point of view. What is this person experiencing? What is this child feeling? Or how can I show this person that I hear and understand what he or she is saying and feeling? And this shift of perspective creates empathy and a safe, non-judgmental avenue for that person to tame the emotion and put a leash on it. Now, I want to tell you about just a couple of the kids I had when I was actually a kindergarten teacher. I had two little girls, and they could be a challenge at sometimes. And I just want to tell you both of their stories. Now, Faith, one morning, was just irritating the daylights out of everybody in sight. And I wondered what was going on. And I had my own options as a teacher. It is to go put her in timeout. But I did something different. And I said, Faith, are you not feeling good today? And immediately she burst into tears and said, no, teacher, I have a headache. And I was able then to say, well, honey, why don't we call Mom and have her come pick you up? So she had been really having bad behavior because she had a headache and she didn't feel good. Sometimes if we try to understand what's going on, it helps. Another child, I think of little Alyssa, and she was the kind of child that when she first came to kindergarten, she did everything you told her not to do. And I remember she put toys in the toilet. She was hitting people, wanting to bite people. And so we tried so much in many different ways to model what it looked like to be in community in our kindergarten classroom. And I'll never forget the day that Alyssa yelled out during our special station time where each of the kids would get to go to a different station, which included the computer. And she was over by Brig, who was a big boy already in kindergarten. And she yelled out and said, Teacher Wendy, I'm being community. And I looked over there, and she had actually let somebody else get on the computer. And she loved the computer, by the way. She had finally learned the joy of not flipping her lid all the time. And over that year, I saw so much growth as she had more and more emotional regulation. And it was just, by the end, it was so much more of a joy to have her in the classroom. So I want to challenge you with those kids that seem like they are so difficult. Do not give up on them. There's a lot of talk these days about resilience, and resilience is basically the process of handling stress and recovering from trauma and adversity. And our Bibles are full of ways to do that, to give thanks in all circumstance, for this is the will of God. That's something that Paul wrote. And if you look at these two brains, one on the left is the resilient coping brain, which I would say would be Paul after conversion. And on the other side is the risky coping, where the person is not being able to cope well with the stressors. And that's Saul before he met Jesus, because he was basically flipping his lid all the time, and his response to all that cortisol in his brain was to want to kill people, that fight mechanism. That is how he responded. But we don't have to do that. Just look at on the left-hand side. See the activity in the frontal lobe when you are able to handle and cope stress as well. Paul also said, I can handle all in any circumstance through Christ who strengthens me. There's so much in God's word that can help us bring that frontal lobe power to create better decision making and love and empathy and understanding. Now, we all know, because of the stressors that we've been talking about, that everybody handles stress in different ways. Every child has had different experiences, and you can't always know what they are going through by just looking at them. So how deep is the mud? Well, it depends on who you ask and what those people have gone through. Now, Pastor Mark is 6'6", and I am only 5'2". So I am like that little dog there who I'm just about drowning in the mud, while Pastor Mark, he's barely gotten it up to his ankles. So we all go through some of the same stuff, like COVID-19, but we all cope with it in different ways for different reasons. And we've talked about the genetic influences. We've talked about the ACEs, those influences from our childhood experiences. And also our experience on how we've learned to trust God or not. We're still in that journey of really learning to trust God through higher stressors. And sometimes we haven't done a great job trusting Him. We're still on that journey, but He does not give up on us. That is the good news. Now, just to illustrate a little further of how everybody has different triggers and different meanings to some of the same stimulus or the same stressors, a researcher asked different people to come up and smell cinnamon and ask, okay, what do you think of when you smell cinnamon? And some people would think of pies, cinnamon pies, or yummy things at Christmas time. Well, one woman came up and said, this reminds me of when I smelled burnt trees when I was running away from soldiers. So you can't always think that the same stressor is going to be the same for any person. I actually experienced that when I was teaching kindergarten, when I brought out balloons, and I had one little boy who absolutely went into hysterical screaming, crying the second he saw a balloon. Now, I don't know why that triggered such a response. I did not know the history of that, but I very quickly put away the balloons and we did something different. So to understand, don't judge people because they have a trigger or something sets them off, and maybe they don't even understand it. But make sure that we can be empathetic and acknowledge how somebody feels. Now, I find this really interesting. I was just looking up how people, the suggestions that the CDC from the government is telling people how they can deal with COVID-19 and the stress and the loneliness, the isolation, all those things, how they can help themselves cope. And I found this absolutely fascinating. And if you take a look at it, you will discover that their suggestions are very much like Adventists have been preaching forever on how to deal with stress and how to have a happier life and to love God more and people. And it is interesting. So look at this. They say take breaks from watching and reading or listening to news stories, including those on social media. And it's good to be informed, but hearing about the pandemic over and over and over again probably isn't such a good thing to do, right? Or the political messages. Maybe you can hear it once, but if you're going to listen to it over and over and over and over again, that's putting yourself up for having your lid flipped all day long. There's other things they say. Take a deep breath, stretch, get healthy food, exercise, get a lot of sleep, avoid alcohol and other substances that could be harmful. They talk about getting your vaccinations. They talk about taking time to unwind and do activities you enjoy. And they talk about your faith community and talking with people and being connected in a healthy way. Well, now if you look on the other side, where these other bullets are, where the Adventist message is, we've always said, seek first the kingdom of God. What are we feeding ourselves with? Are we feeding first Jesus? Or are we feeding ourselves on news agencies that only have yucky stuff to say? Be aware of what you are feeding yourself with. Feed on Jesus. Meditate on him, walk in nature, have a sense of gratitude, eat well-balanced meals, exercise, sleep well, take time to unwind, connect with your faith community, support others. You know this. This is all our Adventist message, and I just found it kind of ironic that the CDC, to combat a lot of the stress that COVID-19 has, is basically the Adventist message. They just, and they actually put it at the very last bullet to say, your faith-based organizations. Well, hey, God is the best, I think, in taking stress away than anybody that I know of. So now that we know a little bit more about what's going on in our brain, we can, as schools and churches, become more trauma-informed care. And there's 3 pillars that they basically talk about, is creating that safe environment, building relationships and connections, and supporting and teaching emotional regulation. Now, we do really good, I think, with creating a safe environment and building relationships and connectedness, but I think we can improve on our supporting and teaching emotional regulation. I don't know about you, but growing up in Adventism, it was kind of a taboo almost to say that you were really having problems. It was really easy to put a mask on, and when somebody says, "How are you doing?" you always say, "Oh, I'm fine." We wouldn't say, "But I'm not. I'm broken. I need help." I think we need to be more transparent with our vulnerability, and that way we can help each other more. So we need daily doses of healthy interactions, and even if COVID has separated us in a way, take those calls, FaceTime calls. Make sure that we're really connecting. Zoom, all the different methods. We have technology that can just encourage each other. Our schools and churches are really way ahead on many things. We're loving and supporting each other, but we may not have realized that we could train each other on how to cope better with these stressors, and even teach our children, as they're learning to make better decisions and as their faith is growing, to have better tools in their box to help them cope better. Can you imagine if we all helped to improve our teaching of emotional regulation in our Sabbath schools and Pathfinders, Adventures, our church, our school, our board meetings? We could teach our kids so that they understand what happens when they're getting close to flipping their lid, and they can understand themselves, and they can be more gracious to those around them that might be struggling with it. And we can teach them as young as 2 years old to understand this concept. And we also need to be advocates for mental health support and professionals. Just doing this, a lot of times there is some brain responses that need to be helped with that we can't do immediately. What are some of the things that you're already doing that are good? Think about those things. Now, in research, they already know that a sense of gratitude putting in gratitude in your classroom in a routine. They actually did a study and they said that you need to be grateful for at least three things through the Harvard School research, and you will be doing so much better with your frontal lobe. It will be activating it to light up. So we need to be thankful. I do want to share with you just some real practical calming strategies that you can use to teach kids, to teach your board, to teach your congregation, whatever it is, just to take these. And I hope you will realize that these are actually all researched methods that can really help in de-escalating the flipping of the lid and bringing that big hug back again of the frontal lobe to say to the limbic system, you're okay, don't worry, you've got this. Well, I'd like to show you some of the really cool researched calming strategies that you can use. And here's just a couple of them. This one's called the magic mustache. And basically you take your finger and you put it right underneath your nose, and it's a pressure point there. And you just press right under the nose, and you can cross your feet at the same time and just press it and then release. Press it and release. There, magic mustache. Easy, right? Second one, quiet lap. You can do crisscross with your feet. You're sitting crisscrossed, and then you can take your hands and you can put them over your eyes and just lean over your crisscrossed feet and just breathe and relax. That's another way you can do it. You hold it there, breathe, relax over your knees. And then you can even talk to the child or the person who's upset, and you can let them know, hey, it's going to be okay. Just breathe. Take your time to calm down. Another thing you can do is a self-hug. So in COVID, obviously, we can't hug each other very much, but this is something you can do. Okay, take your arms, give yourself, cross your hands. You're going to give a big hug. Got that? Okay, hug that way, and then switch now and do the other way. That feels really good to get a nice, good hug, because we're not getting enough hugs, I'm just telling you, during COVID. So a self-hug, you squeeze together in a big hug. You can reverse it. You can just have that quiet moment, closing your eyes and breathing. And that's another way to help bring that flipping of the lid down to be in the safe zone. All right, another one you can use, I don't know about you, but I like pizza. And this is one that they call the pizza breathing. Or if you think about it, God already knew about this, because the minute humanity was created, he gave them the breath of life, right? And even the name Yah, where you take a Yahweh, is almost like breathing, right? So you want to think about that. So the pizza breathing one is, you kind of think of that you have a pizza, you put it in your hand, and first you're going to smell it, and then you breathe out, because you're going to blow it because it's hot, right? So you're breathing in and you're just smelling it. Smell that yummy pizza, and then you blow. Cool it down. That's another one that you can use. Another one you can do, you can put your hands over your head and you breathe in and out, big, deep breaths. Right? Another way you can do it is, breathing in God's grace and breathing out praise. That's another way you can think of it. And just find these are all just ideas of ways where you can take it from that amygdala, limbic system being heightened and alert and stressed and in anxiety, and bringing it down to a safe level. So I'm just going to dare that you try some of these at a board meeting that is having high stress, and see if you can get them to do some of these really neat ways to calm down. They also say that every 20 minutes you need to do something to give yourself a brain break. So these are also ideas for brain breaks. So one of them that you probably are familiar with is the rubbing the tummy and patting the head, right? So I rub tummy, pat the head. I always have to rub first and then I can pat. And then you switch. Rub the tummy, pat the head. That is one of the other ones, and you can swap back and forth. Another one is to point your finger on your nose, right? And your other to cross and touch your ear, and then switch. And I don't think I can do that very good. Okay. There you go. That's another stress reliever. Believe it or not, these are all research things. And one of the things I found, and I didn't even know that this was helpful, but I have these cards, and I'm not even sure where I got them. But when I saw that my kids' eyes were glazed over, and maybe preachers could do this sometime. I don't know, when you're preaching and it doesn't seem like anything's getting through. Of course, it's hard to do when you're Zooming your preaching. But I used to put on music and I'd say, okay, kids, we need a brain break. So let's have a brain break. And so I would put on some fun, lively music. And then when I stopped the music, I would hold up a card and the kids would have to assume the position. And I had all different kinds of them. And we would go again. They'd do music, assume the position. Do some more music, da 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 da, and assume the position. Okay, here's another one. Assume the position. And they would laugh. They would move around the room. I would have them move while the music was going, and then they'd have to assume the positions. So there's just all different kinds of positions that they would go in. And when I could see that they had had a sufficient brain break, then we would actually get going and say, okay, guys, you did good. Let's get back to work. You ready? Oh, yes, teacher, we're going to do it. So, hey, Pathfinders, Adventure Club, maybe even your board meeting. Well, I know adults may not want to do this, but think about ways that you can have a brain break for even those adults. And if they're having a hard time wrestling with a really difficult problem, you do need to have a brain break too, okay? So give yourself a break. Adults are just children that have grown up and hopefully have grown up psychologically and physically and spiritually. So we want that to happen. Another one they have, I don't know if you've heard of it, and I'm not really sure about all the research behind it, but they have tapping in some of those pressure points that you have on your head. This spot here. They actually have the karate chop area on your hand, and that sometimes, like before a test or something, sometimes it's helped kids to actually calm down, or adults even. And I don't really understand the science behind it, but apparently that does help some. Okay, so that gives you some more ideas and more things in your arsenal of ideas of what you can do to bring that level of stress down and have the frontal lobe take over and give the rest of you a big hug so that you are safe and at peace. And I'll tell you, for me personally, although these are wonderful things in teaching kids and stuff, but I'll tell you, just that special time with God, that you and I take time away, shutting off everything else and focusing on Him, and then remembering that throughout the stressors of the day. There is nothing like that to remind you of the bigger picture, that my little stresses right now, God has them when I give them to Him, and I don't have to worry. So we've gone through lots of things together, just ways to have better mental health and strategies that we can use. So I just want to encourage you as churches and schools that we can equip our families and our kids and our churches with better strategies for mental health and mental regulation, emotional regulation. We can teach our kids what's happening in the brain, and I can tell you, when I understood what was happening in my brain, I had a better understanding of how to utilize some of those strategies that God talks about in His Word. So try to think of ways that you can create safe routines for thankfulness, for ways that kids can be vulnerable and say, how can we work on this problem so that we can bring our stress level down and be in a safe place again, and recognize when somebody else is getting stressed or being anxious about something, and how can we help them. By training each other in this way, we can be the hands and feet of Jesus. There is a Bible verse that I just love, and it's Isaiah 26:3. It says, "You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on Him." because He trusts in you. Your responsibility as teachers and pastors and personnel is so important. You are more important than a president of a company, a president of a country, the CEO. You are molding minds and hearts towards heaven that will not only impact here on earth, but in eternity. And I just want to encourage you that you have a chance during this time of a lot of stressors to show everyone around you the answer and put a smile back on your face and calm that limbic system with joy and peace and love, because we have a God who is strong and gracious and kind and will help us all the way through. So thank you for being with me through this journey. And now we get to ask some questions, and I hope I can answer some of them. But I want you to, just before I completely go, if you look up YouTube ideas on mental health, self-regulation for children, there are great videos out there. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we answer some questions. So thank you for having me, and I hope that one day I can get back up to Alaska. It's been many years since I've been there. All right, thanks.
On your earlier thing about the soul winning plan, which was appreciated, that you got your team together based on a group. I think it was in that where you had some students, you had a couple teachers,
Yeah.
maybe one or two other, I don't know. On your marketing plan, how'd you choose the folks that put that in? I mean, these are some of the mechanics, I think.
I'm going to tell you, I would do it differently now than I did it then. But then I had a bunch of people in my church and in my community that I trusted that were very, very good in the business world. And whether they were successful orchardists, some of them ran successful retirement home communities. All of them were my age or older at the time, and for marketing. And so it worked out just fine. But now with the advent of social media, I think I would purposely put some people that are a lot younger than me on this to understand how Kylie Jenner can be a billionaire.
Right.
Because of Instagram, I don't understand that for the life of me. But yeah, I would put together a team of people that are successful at marketing businesses, and then I would include in that young people that understand social media marketing. And the people I'm putting together in this church for this purpose, and I'm new enough here, so this is all still kind of materializing here. In my other churches, I did it, but this is a different animal. Two of the main people are people that have really successful YouTube channels that are growing and that know all the little tricks on how to get viewers in the YouTube world. I don't watch YouTube. I watch occasionally. I watch TV shows and stuff like that. My son has zero interest. He's 24. He has zero interest in watching TV. He watches YouTube channels on stuff all the time. It's a different world than I grew up with. I grew up with 3 channels where you had to get up out of your chair and click and adjust the antenna. Yeah, this is he lives in a different world, and some of the young people that I deal with here in our church, they live in a different world. They're watching stuff on Instagram and YouTube. Former associate pastor of mine, she dropped out of formal pastoral ministry to just do her own Instagram channel on spiritual things. And she, in the space of, I don't know how long, has eclipsed 20,000 followers now. And they start paying you for being an influencer. It's crazy. So I don't understand this stuff, but I would have those people on my team. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you.
You bet, Kevin. Kevin, I have Kevin Miller that is a friend of mine on Facebook. Are you him?
Probably not. There's another Kevin Miller out there. We've exchanged mail at times.
Oh, okay. Any other questions? So Melvin,
Yes,
you're the executive secretary?
that's correct.
All right. I'm going to ask you, is there any excuse for anybody to not take some of this information and do a little something else?
No, everybody should be able to get something out of what you shared. In fact, it was so exciting. That's why, just to let everybody know, we are recording this, so you're able to view this again and take notes, careful notes, if unless you and be able to apply this in your school or church setting. So thank you, Mark. Really appreciate that.
Make sure we don't make this the last time I come to Alaska, but next time it needs to be in person, okay? I've spoken in your conference office a couple of times, and it was a 10th grade school at the time. It's a 12th grade school now, is that right, in Anchorage?
No, it's still a junior academy, but we do have an academy now in Palmer.
Oh, in Palmer. Oh, okay.
Yes.
I got relatives in what's close to Palmer?
Wasilla?
Yeah, they might be there. Jewetts, the Robert and Courtney Jewett. I don't know if any of you know them, but love to come up and see them. My niece and nephew. So, yeah, let's make it a thing. Usually, I don't do this topic so much anymore. Usually, I'm just preaching at camp meetings and preaching Bible and those kinds of things. But hey, it's always a pleasure to share my experience. I could tell you lots and lots of things that didn't work, but you already know those because we're all from the School of Hard Knocks. So yeah. Hey, appreciate you all. My son got a flat tire. He's already fixed it. And I'm going to go meet him at the discount tire store to see if we still have a little warranty left on it.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark. Steve is, I
Enjoy the
think,
rest
is
of your day.
up.
Say again?
Steve, are you there to close us, or we're going to ask Mark to close us with a word of prayer?
Love
Mark,
to.
why don't you please do it?
Yeah, Father in heaven, my friends, each of them are in such different, unique situations, and some of them are going swimmingly with lots of optimism, and some of my friends are feeling like they're in a hole, and every time they try to dig themselves out, it just gets deeper. Lord, either way, bless the socks off of my friends in Alaska, and Lord, give them courage and give them the people around them to be able to help lift them up and make whatever they're doing for the kingdom a success. Because Lord, ultimately, it's really not about us. It's about your kingdom and the people we can fill with it. Lord, we want your kingdom to be full. We want that vision that John had when he looked over and saw a number of people on the sea of glass that no man can count. We want to be a part of that no man can count number. So Lord, guard our salvation and help us to be able to bring others into it. In Jesus' name, amen.